Okay, guys, the internet has been waiting for this one. The Godfather and based mom. You'll have to explain to me what that term means. I've used it, but I'm not exactly sure I understand its meaning. Uh, how you doing, Christina?
Fine, how are you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I just want to notify the people of some of your background, some of the books that you've written. All have been fantastic. Before we start, so you're currently, let me just check my notes here, a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. You have a very successful video blog called the Factual Feminist. I've checked a few of those videos. They're absolutely fantastic. I recommend for everybody to go check them out. And you've written many books, some of the most notable ones being Who Stole Feminism? How Women Have Betrayed uh, how women have betrayed women, the war against boys, how misguided feminism is harming our young men, one nation under therapy, how the helping culture is eroding self-reliance, and a more recent one, freedom feminism, its surprising history and why it matters today. Fantastic stuff. Today, of course, we are celebrating International Women's Day, so it is particularly befitting that you and I should be talking about feminism, right?
Absolutely. Happy International Women's Day.
uh, so I guess the first thing I wanted to ask you, sort of to contextualize, your part of your life's work is, there are all sorts of bad ideas out there. And one of the things that I pride myself in doing is that I try to tackle as many of these bad ideas as possible, whether it be radical feminism or postmodernism or stupidity in science. Why did you focus your considerable intellect and efforts on tackling this issue?
Well, it wasn't meant to be a lifelong project. Initially, I was teaching philosophy. The chair of my department asked me to teach feminist theory. I took a look at the texts and I was very disappointed. Just as a philosophy professor, I felt that they were question begging. It was almost as if they had taken, many of them, not all, but many of them had taken, it was warmed over Marxism, let me put it that way. They'd crossed out class and put gender. And it was also a kind of a conspiracy theory about the patriarchal oppressive system, which seemed to me, by the time I was looking at these texts in the 80s, it didn't really describe American society. What's interesting about American society in many Western countries isn't how oppressive we are, but why we became so liberated for so many people. We're not perfect, but we've done a better job than almost any country, the United States, certainly, and any country on earth. Historically, you've never seen this level of liberation and overall prosperity. Again, it's not perfect, but it's so much better. But these feminists were not interested in celebrating any achievements of Western society. It was denigrating and seemed to have contempt for the Enlightenment. And so I wrote a paper and went to the American Philosophical Association and challenged my colleagues in feminist philosophy. Typically, when you go to the APA, you have a spirited discussion. It sometimes gets very heated, and then you go out for drinks. We did not go out for drinks. I was excommunicated from a religion I didn't know existed.
Now, what is the reason for the disconnect between the reality, as you so describe it right now, where, there clearly isn't this, endless patriarchal oppression going on, certainly in the Western context, and their narrative? Where does that disconnect come from?
I think that they believe their own theories. They take them seriously. And many of the theorists exist in a little, these little esoteric enclaves and on the campus. They don't, I don't know that they're ever challenged, because what happened, and this also is unique. Not only did I discover that this field of feminist theory was riddled with fallacies and dogmatism, but these critics, these theorists, did not take well to criticism. Now, in my case, I was excommunicated. Men had to run for cover. So we have a body of scholarship that has not been criticized.
Right.
I mean, that's not to say they don't criticize one another. They have vicious internecine battles, but they really do not. If you criticize them, their first principles, for example, you were considered by definition a backlasher.
Right. Right. And of course, now we have that if you challenge any feminist rhetoric on the internet, it's cyberbullying, right? It's a form of assault.
They tried that years ago. There was I forget what group, some leading group of feminist academics wanted to call hostility to feminist theory a form of intellectual harassment. And they didn't get very far, but I think they're going to bring it back because a lot of their bad ideas from the 80s and 90s, they've all come back.
So is the idea basically that it's a non-violent way to monopolize discourse, right? I mean, in some countries, if you don't like what people are saying, you behead them. In the Western tradition, we're not there yet, fortunately, and so they find alternate ways to at least behead your voice, correct?
I do think it is a strategy for achieving power,
right.
Monopolizing departments. If you denigrate critics, then you feel no obligation to invite them into your department.
Right.
Now, if I were a chair of a philosophy department, I might think there are theories I don't agree with, but maybe we should have someone that represents that school and can give it a positive presentation to the students. They don't think of critics that way. When I go to campuses, they sometimes organize boycotts, or these days they set up safe rooms because all the girls are triggered in women's studies.
We'll come to the trigger stuff later in the chat. Yes. I heard about your situation with Milo.
Oberlin, Georgetown.
Right.
Now Milo is out there.
Right.
And we've been lecturing together. We'll talk about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of the things that upsets me about the feminist or the radical feminist rhetoric is that they're impervious to empirical facts that are argued reasonably, dispassionately. In other words, there is no way to falsify their narrative. And in that sense,
unfalsifiable.
Right. And in that sense, then it becomes outside the realm of scientific discourse. And so
and all counter evidence becomes evidence, because they will say, if you show them that women do not accept what they are saying, or that, it's an unpopular philosophy, that's just proof to them that how much more work they have to do.
Exactly.
Or if you show them how far women have advanced, and but then it's never enough, because then they will look for areas where there isn't statistical parity, and that automatically counts as discrimination, unless it's some area where women are doing better than men. That's fine.
So I was actually going to discuss one set of data that speak to this issue that we're discussing. So I did a Sad Truth clip where I summarized data, very reputable data, looking at the male to female ratio in educational attainment at American universities across 4 levels of diploma. So associate's degree, bachelor's degree, master's degree, and doctoral degree. So 4 levels of education across 5 races. So there were 20 cells that could be looked at in terms of the male-female ratio. Can you guess how many cells women outnumbered men in out of the 20?
Would I be wrong to say 20?
You are exactly correct. That's why you're the superstar. So, I mean, imagine when you've got data that shows that in every conceivable possible way, women outnumber men, yet that does not serve to slightly attenuate the discourse, because they'll come up with an example of a math department at some liberal arts college that doesn't have the equal number of full professor tenured men and women, and therefore, the patriarchy is still operating.
They are spin mistresses. They just spin the truth and come out with the conclusion they had reached before. I mean, they have these foregone conclusions. They will never give them up.
Right.
And I've been fighting this for years. I didn't think it would take this long. And now, as I said, it's come back.
Right.
And all of the things I was fighting in the 90s that I wrote about in Who Stole Feminism, that book came out in 94. So I was just reading it, and it seems to apply more today than when I wrote it.
Oh, is that right? So if you look at the trajectory, it's not as though the pendulum is swinging away? If anything, it's only worsening, according to you?
It's only worsening.
No kidding.
It's
Okay.
it's in a way, it's a crisis at many, many levels. It's a crisis of misinformation because these women, these gender scholars, they are essentially the brain trust of information on gender, but they're unreliable.
Right.
Journalists don't know that, so they'll read a study done by what appears to be a very prestigious gender scholar, a concerned, female academic, and they take it seriously.
Right.
And there are statistics about about discrimination against women, bias against women, that are false, like the typical, wage gap claim or these
Right.
claims about a rape culture. These are not true, but they have been repeated so often they're beyond correction.
Right, exactly. Now, what do you think of this one? I also did a piece on this. The niqab and the burqa are liberating because they avert the male gaze, whereas the bikini is a symbol of oppression. So, I mean, what world must we live in where the removal of a woman's identity from the public sphere is liberating, but her recognizing that, no kidding, she is a sexual being that in some sense wishes to advertise herself to others, that is viewed as patriarchal oppression. Maybe you could comment a bit about that.
Well, I think you'd have to take, several classes in gender studies to understand that. And it's perverse. I mean, that kind of thing. I mean, I happen to think if women are, religious and they choose to wear head covering, or I have relatives who are Orthodox Jews and they're very happy and they choose to live that way, and that's fine. That's their choice. When it is forced on someone,
Right.
Forced veiling is horrible. And not to mention, forced burqas and
Right.
total shrouding, awful. And when women don't want it, it's so that this is why I, of course, believe in the Enlightenment and personal choice and liberty, and I call it freedom feminism or equity feminism, and that's really allowing women to determine the path they take in life, and to determine for themselves and shape their own happiness. So that what bothers me about these feminists is that you're talking about is that they have this, as I said, this distorted view where they want to say that a woman in the West who freely chooses to wear a bikini
Right.
and enjoys the male gaze, which sorry, a lot of women do enjoy that. In fact, it seems to be a primary preoccupation if you look at women's magazines and the money we spend on makeup, and not because we are coerced, but because we're human beings. We're, in this case, heterosexual women want the attention, the gaze of males. There's nothing wrong with that. This demonizing of sexuality, actually, there's a feminist scholar I like very much, Daphne Patai.
Yes, sure.
University of Massachusetts, who's written a book professing feminism.
We've emailed to each other, I think, a few years ago. Yes, she's great.
She's excellent, but she has used a phrase. I think she coined the phrase. She and her co-author, Noretta Kortka. The phrase is heterophobia.
Right.
And
right.
I do not like homophobia. I do not like the policing of the lives of gay people. It was horrible. But right now, today, what we have is, in the universities especially, a lot of heterophobia and a kind of treating male sexuality as pathological, a lot of policing, and efforts to control that I thought we'd overcome, but we just moved on. The intolerance has moved towards heterosexuality.
Well, the way because you were talking earlier about cosmetics and so on, and that very much speaks to some of the scientific work that I do. So you may or may not know this, but the area that I work in is in applying evolutionary psychology and more generally biological formalisms in understanding human behavior in general, but in understanding consumer behavior in particular. And so, of course, under that rubric, I study things like how men and women use products as sexual signals to ameliorate their lot in the mating market, right? And so it is some of the most fundamental, basal mechanisms to recognize that both men and women wish to signal to each other. I mean, we are a sexually reproducing species. So, for example, when I read something like the astonishing stupidity of the thesis of Naomi Wolf, which I talked about in one of my books, I call it the myth about the beauty myth, right? Where she basically says, I mean, I know you know the story, but for our viewers, women are winning everywhere, and so the only place that the patriarchy can still maintain control over women is by creating this expectation of a beauty myth so that women can feel bad about themselves. I mean, it is so profoundly laughable to espouse such a conspiratorial position. I mean, you have to be so removed from the most basic understanding of sexual dynamics to espouse something like this. So the question that I always ask people that are sort of entrenched within these movements, do you think these feminists in the deep recesses of their private thoughts when they turn off the light at night believe their bullshit or not? Or do they know that they're pulling a scam, but they have to do it for ideological reasons?
I think they believe it.
Really?
Because I don't think most people deliberately tell lies I just don't think people work that way. But we can deceive ourselves.
Exactly.
And I think that, look, this theory is very inviting. It's a beguiling conspiracy theory. And you find anything that's gone wrong in your life, you have a ready-made explanation. You have someone to blame. You have a full-fledged demonology. You have sisters in a struggle. And it's been given very, very, the literature of feminism is, some of these women are good writers. They have exciting ideas. And so it's an inviting world for some people. Now, who are they? I asked myself that because I honestly believed when I wrote Who Stole Feminism, I felt I was speaking, and I still believe I speak for the majority of women and men, normal people with common sense, and yet this movement persists. And I have now come to think of it as a kind of, this sounds a little over the top, but it is a sort of cult for intellectuals.
Right.
And it's almost like a kind of high-level Scientology.
I have a slightly maybe complementary theory regarding who some of these feminists are. And actually, there is now some scientific data that might support what I'm about to say. So there was a paper that was published recently, and I believe actually, if memory serves me right, that I might have been solicited as a reviewer for the paper. Eventually, I didn't do it because I was busy with other stuff. It was a paper that was published in Frontiers of Psychology, looking at the masculinization of women who attended a feminist conference. Have you seen that paper? Are you aware of it?
I am aware of that.
Right.
Yes,
So
very interesting.
Yeah. So let me summarize this, and then I'll kind of link it to my theory. So they basically took digit ratio measures, which are the length of your index to ring finger actually captures how much androgenization you have had in utero, how much you've been exposed to testosterone in utero. And so women could either have very feminized digit ratios or more masculinized ones. And the women in question who were attending this, sort of staunch feminist conference had more masculinized morphology. And also, when you administered to them a dominance scale, a psychometric scale, they also scored higher on dominance. So there definitely seems to be scientific validity in arguing that there is something on the aggregate that is unique about these staunch feminists. Now, my theory is this. We often hold on to attitudes and beliefs that serve to protect our ego, right? I mean, if I'm losing my hair and I'd like to get some hair plugs, then maybe I will hold positive attitudes towards cosmetic surgery because that will protect my ego, right? It'll be in line with my insecurities. Well, my feeling is that, frankly, a lot of these women, and maybe this is a bit controversial, are probably not the top scoring women on the mating market, right? I mean, it's unlikely to be that a woman who clearly sees her power in the heterosexual mating world is likely to be the one who's espousing some of these theories. And therefore, by entrenching myself in this lunacy ideology, it serves to protect me and make me feel better about myself. What do you think about this theory?
Well, I have problems with that theory.
Okay, go for it. Go for it. That's why we're chatting.
I mean, first of all, I don't know how you'd test it, but you'd have to see if it's true. Well, I find a lot of diversity among the women. Some there are, a range. There's some very beautiful women. So people want to say, oh, well, they're overcompensating because they can't compete. Well, that many of them are married.
Right.
And some of my best allies in this battle have been lesbian women.
Right.
Like, Camille Paglia, I mentioned Noretta Kourtka. And there's also Nora Vincent. I don't know if you know her.
I don't know her.
She's quite wonderful. She wrote a book about, she dressed up as a man and went out and for several months to see what it was like. It was sort of like that classic book called Black Like Me.
Right.
I don't know, from the 60s, where a man went out and it was really quite powerful. Well, she did it and dressed up. Anyway, I digress. I can't generalize. And about these women, I do think it's possible that those who are vulnerable to this sort of cult of hyper-feminism may been there. I sometimes wonder if they aren't unusually neurotic. And so they're sort of desperately and depressed and looking for something that will explain this, their suffering. And so it's not clear to me that these are particularly happy people.
Okay. So you are, what you are conceding is there might be some indicator variables or some discriminatory variables that differentiate between the likelihood of my being a staunch feminist or not. We may disagree on what are the variables that best predict my membership in that group or not, but it is clear that there must be some set of variables. I mean, that's what we do, for example, in marketing, right? There are people who buy my product and people who don't buy my product. And I'd like to find the discriminating variables that can tell me what are the variables that predict whether you'll be in group A or group B. And so we could use the same exercise to establish what are the key variables that can help us understand why somebody would be likely to be prone to believing in this ideology. I think that would.
I wish you could do that. I mean, I wish we could find out. And it may be. I don't know if you can do it, but to find out, like, young women that are entering college, like, just you could tell parents, these are the personality characteristics, or some set of characteristics that are predictive of joining this group. And if your daughter does get carried away, I'm not saying she becomes a feminist, that's fine. I'm saying she gets really carried away with campus politics and the anger towards men and this conspiracy theory about patriarchy and the whole, and then all that comes with it. They change, sometimes they lose their sense of humor. They think all humor is sexist and so forth. Most of us would not want that to happen to our daughters.
Right.
And so which girls are most vulnerable? And it would be great if you could isolate some characteristics.
Well,
I can't say after all these years in the academy, except for a certain melancholy, but again, that could even be a result of having entered this world, because I do think I have seen cases where sort of happy, well-adjusted girls go in deeply into these programs, and they will tell you how I lost my sense of humor. I didn't trust anybody. That happened to them as a result of this cult.
Right, got you. Going back to when we were talking about the burqa, I failed to sort of have the natural segue then. Why do you think so many Western feminists have been so inept at tackling the mistreatment, the gross, the truly vile mistreatment of women in other parts of the country, other parts of the world? Is it because cultural relativism trumps their ideology, so that in the victimology poker, it is a worse sin to criticize the behaviors of so-called brown people, and therefore that becomes a no-no? What's the dynamic there? What's happening?
Well, I think you're right. I think the relativism and the multiculturalism just made it impossible for them to feel comfortable about criticizing people, from other cultures, particularly people of color, Hispanics or Arab people that were Muslims or people, Asian. They really are much more comfortable criticizing the men.
Right.
For example, when I go to these colleges, I carry this message. I think the real mission of feminism in the 21st century is to help women in other parts of the world who haven't had two major waves of liberation, to help them with their struggle. So I've been to international women's conferences, and you meet women who are fighting, acid burnings in Cambodia, and they were organizing around that because you can buy it very cheaply, and then a lot of women are punished and mutilated by men who throw acid in their faces. It happens to men too, but women are the primary victims. I've met women who are fighting, genital mutilation in Egypt and Somalia, and child marriage in Iran and so forth. But I go to Oberlin or I go to Georgetown or UCLA, you meet the women in the Women's Center. They're not focused on those issues.
Right.
They're focused on how they are oppressed at Oberlin College or Georgetown by the young men at Oberlin.
Right.
And they speak with more passion and more, sort of moral outrage towards what happened, what somebody said at a party, or, some minor, micro nano aggression. They're not focused on the outside world. This is one of many failures that in our higher education right now, is the self-absorption, the narcissism encouraged in these classes.
So I'm going to link what you said. I think earlier you mentioned, you alluded to neuroticism as a possible mechanism by which some of these women are drawn to this, or the staunch version of this ideology. Let me peddle another theory of mine and see what your reaction to it might be. I've already shared this in a few public forums. So are you familiar with the psychiatric disorder known as Munchausen syndrome?
Yes.
Right. So
where you pretend to be sick all the time?
Right. So if it's Munchausen syndrome, you feign illness, and then what you basically get a lot of attention, and that is something that becomes very intoxicating. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is where you have somebody under your care, typically your biological child, but it could be your pet, it could be your elderly parent. Now you harm them, and then, oh, poor you have a sick child, and so on. Now, I think that a lot of these victimology movements, not just feminism, whether it be, we'll talk about the safe spaces and the social justice warriors and the microaggressions and all that, the trigger warnings, I think it is sort of a collective form of Munchausen syndrome, where people learn that if they ascribe to this victimology narrative, it's a way to get a lot of attention, right? And therefore, so don't you, that sounds like a very plausible hypothesis, right?
It's a good one. Yeah, it's interesting because in a way that's what they do.
Exactly.
They have created this mystique of vulnerability.
Right.
And not just vulnerability. I mean, they describe themselves as living in a state of siege, where they're all injured and traumatized. Right. Now, let's note that these are among the most privileged people in the history of the human race. A young woman on an expensive, Ivy League campus, and yet she comes to believe that she's wounded,
right? And
she forms an alliance with other little wounded birds and animals, and
right.
And they get an enormous attention because now we have this culture. I think Jonathan Haidt's written very well about this. How we've moved from a sort of an ethic of dignity to an ethic, of what he called a dignity culture to a victim culture.
Right.
where you actually get prestige from being a victim, and you are easily wounded. Whereas the prior culture he described as a dignity culture, where you were thought to be,
right.
you wouldn't make a fuss over small
You have to be
slights.
prideful. You have to be self-reliant, right? You have to.
And the last thing you do, you'd only go to authorities.
Exactly.
You wanted to be in charge of your life. You didn't want authorities presiding over them. That was the revolution in the 70s, the sexual revolution.
Right.
When I went to college, we didn't want dorm monitors or anybody.
Right.
Nobody. There was no college official that we ever talked to. I don't remember talking to them or even knowing who they were. I didn't care about them. Well, now these girls are calling them up all the time.
Right.
And I've heard about this in their meetings, that they're constant, their offices everywhere calling. So there's been this infantilization of students. But yes, I think you're onto something. Is this a kind of collective Munchausen syndrome?
Now, I have a personal narrative that allows me to tackle some of this astonishing stupidity. As I said, by virtue of the personal history that I've had. You may or may not know we're Lebanese Jews who escaped Lebanon under imminent threat of execution. So I come from the Middle East. I know about serious trials and tribulations in life. My parents were kidnapped in Lebanon. And so when I now come to North America, experience the freedoms that are afforded to us here, and then have to hear some, as you said, some infantilized, coddled, buffoons crying about...
Exactly, infantilized, coddled buffoons.
You like that, huh? That's copyright right there.
But I have a question for you.
Sure.
Why aren't there more people like you? Now, stipulate you do have, this background, but there are very few scholars that are confronting this.
Can I tell you what?
I know there are a lot of men, and some of them have difficult backgrounds, and some of them are veterans, all kinds of things, and yet most men don't want to do it. I can understand. So how did you decide?
Well, thank you. I really appreciate your question, and there's no way that I can answer that without obviously speaking of myself, so you'll forgive me if it sounds a bit immodest. I frankly think that very few people have the testicular fortitude to live out their convictions, right? I recently said on a show that no careerist consideration is worth my sacrificing what I consider to be the truth. I'm just built that way. I am offended by bullshit. I mean, it literally attacks my sense of self, right? So to the best...
You know what? I have that. I am offended by bullies.
Exactly.
And I saw bullying in the academy by these women. They were irrational. They were mean. They were inconsiderate, and not all of them, but enough of them.
Exactly.
And so that's what still really distresses me. But I can see you react, and the irrationality is also...
Well, exactly. And so I guess I have the right sort of constellation of traits to not care about these considerations, to not care about cowardly concerns, and therefore I'm just compelled naturally to speak out. Now, I often try. I mean, one of the reasons why I am so open, other than, of course, to just share the truth and have interesting...
Do you have tenure?
I do have tenure, yes. But
it doesn't. But most people, many professors
are tenured and are still quiet. And incidentally, I was outspoken when I didn't have tenure, so that's not... So the protection that is afforded by tenure is not what explains why I behave the way that I do, because even if I'm tenured, I might want to receive a prestigious professorship elsewhere, and I know that if I kept my mouth shut, I might increase my chances of getting it, but I'm not willing to do that. In other words, if you want me, you're going to want me for exactly, who I am, right? And I'm not willing to compromise on that, because at the end of the day, I have to lay my head down on the pillow and feel comfortable with who I am. And the only way I can do that is by speaking the truth as best as I see it. Now, what upsets me is exactly what you said, which is that so many of our colleagues, certainly so many of the people that are endowed with the possibility of altering the discourse, are breathtakingly cowardly. What is it that we can do to compel them to break out of their stupor of cowardice and actually engage these horrible ideas? And I'm not talking here only about feminism. I'm talking about, maybe now we could talk about the trigger warnings and the safe spaces and the political correctness. What can we do to get people in academia to wake up and fight back against this stuff?
Oh, that's not
That
going to be easy. They just don't. I mean, I don't know that academics have been noted for their bravery. Uh, if I think back, it's not a group that stands out, but it may be the case that things are so ridiculous that these groups, especially the gender warriors, have pushed things so far that they are going to arouse, activism in this, relatively quiet group, and that the kind of silent majority will
right.
begin to speak out. But you would have thought that would have happened by now.
I know. Well, I mean, there are, of course, a few that are. Now, is this one of the reasons, by the way, why, I hope you don't mind me asking this personal question, you left academia? Was it as a response of some of these kinds of dynamics where you were unwilling or unable to continue navigating amongst that crowd, or was it for other reasons?
Oh no, I also had tenure,
Okay.
and I got along very well with my colleagues in the philosophy department at Clark University. But I'd been teaching for a long time, and I just wanted more time to write. And at a think tank, you can write. You have a research assistant and no papers to grade and no meetings.
Well,
So it's fantastic. It's a dream job. And but in the other departments in my university, I saw what was happening and how they were operating, and I didn't like what I saw. And for example, initially, my courses were cross-listed with women's studies, but when I started being critical and had written some papers about what was happening with academic feminism, they didn't want to list my courses any longer. And again, I was just, became a pariah. But it didn't
right.
matter. It wasn't in my department. I was good friends with everybody in my department.
Now, out of 100 hate mail or negative emails that you might receive, give us the breakdown of the demographic profile of those people. In other words, is it first? Let's do it by biological sex. Are most of the blowback that you get, is it probably from women? I suspect, correct?
I don't get that much.
You don't get, oh,
In
wow,
email, once in a while, but what I do get is every day uh, email, sometimes several, from students who are suffering. A
right,
lot of young men who were falsely accused. I hear from them, and the stories are harrowing.
right,
It's such a terrible thing, and these young men, their lives are ruined. This one boy wrote to me how he doesn't want. He's been changed. He doesn't want to leave his house. He's been sort of psychologically annihilated and shamed. And I hear from them, and then I do hear from a lot of scholars who agree with me and want to help me, but they sort of work behind the scenes.
privately, exactly.
There's a
I've
lot. You probably get that.
Well, I was gonna say that I've mentioned this in several forums where I talk about how so many colleagues will write to me, as you said, behind the scenes to say, "Oh, we admire your courage. I support what you're doing," but then, of course, they won't take the time to just like your Facebook post, right? I mean, I'm not asking you to stand up in front of a stadium and swear allegiance to Gad Saad. I'm just asking you to like my Facebook post. They
I'll
will.
swear allegiance to
Oh,
you.
well, aren't you sweet? So yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, people are really afraid of their shadows, and it's unclear why, as you said, especially when you're tenured. I mean, that's what it affords you, protection. But people
I know.
they're herd animals. That's how the winds are blowing. Therefore, I need to stay in step and not rock the boat. That's how people are. But you know what? History, whether it be for the positive or the negative, is shaped not by those people. It is shaped by those who stand out, who fight for things, rightly or wrongly, whether they be cretins or heroes. And so the reality is that if you're going to do anything that's worthwhile, you're likely going to have to be somebody who is controversial, who challenges the orthodoxy, right?
You know what I love? Because I give a lot of speeches on campus, I'm starting to meet millennials who are, in juniors or sophomores, juniors, and they want to start like a free speech movement on their
Right.
campus. I go there, or Milo's been going there, and there's a young man now at Bucknell who's decided that he's going to, try to organize students at his campus and elsewhere around, bringing back due process, bringing back freedom. I just heard from a student who's at Villanova. He wants to do that. And so I love the people that I'm able to meet.
Right.
And young woman, I met this great young woman, and she's all, she looks like a hipster feminist, and she was, tattoos and
Right.
red dye, brilliant red hair, but she is fed up with it, and she
Right.
starting a Facebook for women who just, want to be able to be reasonable
Right.
on gender issues. So those kids, they're the outliers, but they're also the leaders.
Right.
And they fill me with hope. But on the other hand, having said that, the other side has, I mean, Emma Watson's going around now, and
Yes, the actress, right?
yes, and
Yeah.
teaming up with bell hooks, and I've just spent a few weeks immersed in this literature of intersectionality.
Oh, yes.
Oh my goodness. What a morass. But what I noticed is that no one's really come out to criticize it except a few Marxists.
Right.
Marxists don't like it for various reasons, and they have some good critiques, but it's just been able to flourish, and now it's the dominant philosophy of almost every gender studies
Right.
department, probably all of them. And the National Women's Studies Association, just quickly to tell you how crazy things are, when I was writing Who Stole Feminism, I went to one of their conferences. They had a gathering in Austin, Texas in 1992, and it was a crazy place in 1992, this conference. The women were all fighting. The Black Women's Caucus was boycotting, and there were all these other subgroups. So the theme of the whole conference was narratives of pain and litanies of outrage.
Right.
And we were supposed to break down, and all the outrage was about the group, not, the problems women have out in the society. It was all about the group. So we were supposed to break down into groups based on our grievances and healing needs. So there were groups for Asian women, and there were some Black women, lesbian women, women with disabilities. None of the groups proved stable. They kept fighting. So some of there were some Black lesbian women, but some of them had white partners that gave them privilege. They had to form their own group. Then there was a group of women with allergies that erupted and was angry and furious. Anyway, it was just this constant process of mitosis and these groups, smaller and smaller groups. It was a victimology out of control. So that was 92. The other day, I went to look at the website of the National Women's Studies Association to see, like, have they calmed down? Are they all what happened? What could possibly happen? Well, here's what happened. They've united. And they've united, and they voted for a cause that brought them all together. They voted to boycott Israel.
Ah, there you go. The evil juice. Juice. Evil juice. Are you familiar?
Can you believe it? I mean, Israel, the one country where in the middle, in that region where women have basic rights and gays have rights, and women are fine overall, but what they did was it's this perverse reasoning that we talked about.
So it basically took possibly the oldest hatred known to mankind, a genocidal hatred, to unite them. So it's a very heartwarming story. It's united in hate. What could be wrong with that, right?
So the intersectionality leads to the intersection of like paranoia and anti-Semitism.
Right. Beautiful. Beautiful. Love it.
But it's predictable, and even though if you go back to that crazy conference in 92, the seeds were there because of the self-absorption and the obsession with victim hierarchies. And so what they've done is they've now worked it out through intersectionality. The I guess the idea is that if you, the more oppressed you are, that gives you both moral standing and authority, and it gives you a privileged epistemic,
Yep.
position. And so they're thought to, like a Black lesbian disabled woman would have more insight
Yes.
into the oppression networks.
Well, that's the
And
oppression Olympics, right?
it's the oppression Olympics.
Yeah.
So I think what happened is how can they end up uniting hating Israel
Right.
is, well, I don't know how they got there exactly,
Right.
but it
Right.
has something to do with this hierarchy. So
Well,
yes.
I've got a better story for you. You ready? You're sitting down. So I did a clip a few years ago. This is to continue along the sort of anti-Semitic bent, but this is actually coming from, if I remember correctly, from an Israeli woman. So this woman was doing a study in Israel about the supposed, rapes and violation of Palestinian women by the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces. And so she did a study where she tried to identify such cases, to document such cases, and to her utter dismay, because it, of course, didn't go with the narrative, she found that there were no recorded incidents. None. There were no recorded incidents of rape by IDF on Palestinian women. Guess what she concluded based on that empirical fact. Let's see.
Oh.
Let's see if you've been exposed enough to lunacy.
I know the answer.
Oh, you do?
Of course. She had to conclude that the problem was far more serious than we ever imagined, because not only is there this epidemic of sexual predation, it's completely covered up. The victims are invisible.
It's much more diabolical than this. Good effort, based mom, but I'm sorry to say you didn't get it. Here's what the true answer is. You ready?
Yeah.
The fact that the IDF did not engage in the rape of these women demonstrates how much they have marginalized the other, how much they despise the other, how racist.
That is weird.
Oh yeah, you could watch my clip. It's right there. I think it was done at Hebrew University, if I'm not mistaken. So imagine, if she had uncovered that they had raped, then of course they would have been evil, disgusting Jews. If she uncovers that they were perfectly moral, not a single instance, it demonstrates.
Can't win. They can't. Jews can't win ever.
Jews can't win.
People, and in the United States, people talk about hate crimes. I haven't checked this out, but I have heard from reliable sources. There are more. The Jews are targets of the majority.
Oh, astonishing! So every year the FBI comes out. I shared these. I think maybe last year or the year before. I think I did the 2014 FBI stats. You're exactly right. They come out with hate crimes broken down by different targets of hate. And the Jews are overwhelmingly the kings of, the ones who are victim of hate. And certainly much more than, for example, what you hear about, Islamophobia, right? I mean, Muslims are afraid to walk the streets in the United States because there's such rampant Islamophobia. Well, guess what? There's a lot more anti-Semitism. So there you go. All right, let's talk about, since we're continuing on this bent of lunacy, benevolent sexism. I love this one. I did a few pieces on this, both on my Psychology Today column and also in one of my Sad Truths. Maybe you could first explain to us what benevolent sexism is, and then I might actually discuss some of the items that are used to measure benevolent sexism. But why don't you take it away?
Well, it's actions, comments that are, ostensibly polite or complimentary, but underneath is actually a hidden denigration. So, for example, a man opening a door seems polite, but he's actually demonstrating his superiority. Or, will you give me some examples?
Yeah, so here we go. You ready? So should I read you? There's 11 of them. I don't know if we need to go.
Don't read all of them.
Yeah, exactly. I'll do a few. So this one, you basically answer strongly disagree to strongly agree, or whatever the scale is. So people are often truly happy in life without being romantically involved with a member of the opposite sex, the other sex. This is reverse coded. So if you say, yes, it's true that people could be happy in life, that's good. If you say that, no, I would want to be with somebody of the opposite sex, if a man answers that, he's engaging in benevolent sexism. So the recognition that a sexually reproducing species, a member of that species, would answer that he would be happier if he were accompanied in life with the opposite sex is benevolently sexist.
And if a woman says that?
Well, yeah, but I don't know. This is
we don't know. There's a man saying that.
Exactly. We're trying to uncover the hatred of men here. Please don't ruin the narrative. Here's another one. Men are complete. This is reverse coded again. Men are complete without women. If I answer yes, that's good from a benevolent sexist. If I say no, I'm not complete without a woman. I love my wife. I want to share my life with my wife. I am engaging in benevolent sexism. It's astonishing.
It's astonishing. And it's also so sad to think that young people are imbibing these lessons that are so just hostile to human nature.
And it's just in case people might think, oh, this is some quack, inventory that nobody cares about. This is from a paper by Glick and Fisk, 1996, that has been cited hundreds of times. I think last I checked several years ago, it was, well over 400 or 500 times in a top journal. So this is not, some fringe paper that nobody cares about. This is sort of the definitive paper to uncover and unmask benevolent sexism. It's just unbelievable.
Isn't it interesting that we've come to the point where you notice how the left does this? Let's say you can't find enough overt sexism. So then you need a new category, benevolent sexism or hidden bias, or then you no longer count people. You can't find enough people being overtly racist. So then you say, well, you have to check your privilege. You have your privileges made. There's they keep upping the ante. And what's being missed? What's being missed is that overall, what's important to understand about our society is all the things we're doing right.
Right.
And even the crazy things the left does, I'm always listening, because there's always, even with political correctness, some of it was just politeness,
right,
and being considerate, and not using words like retard, or these a lot of young people do that, and they don't realize that they can have very unhappy effect on very vulnerable people. So you want to listen to them. But what's so sad is that it's now so out of control,
right, that
I don't know, what were we talking about? I lost my.
No, let me come in. You're talking about the upping the ante of coming up with endless new ways of finding racism and sexism. Here's another great example. By the way, I discussed several of these. Sorry for the plug in. A recent lecture I gave at the University of Ottawa on political correctness, so folks can check it out. So there was a student at Queen's University, an important university in Canada, in Kingston, Ontario, that decided, she was Iranian, but not of Muslim descent. She decided to wear a hijab as an experiment to see how people would respond to her. Are you familiar with what I'm going to say next, or you don't know this case?
No.
Okay, get ready. This is a good one. And so I don't remember how many days it was. I think she wore it for something like 18 days, because of course she was going to uncover this, this endless overt hatred, intolerance, bigotry towards Muslims. And what she found is that people were very kind, respectful, and they didn't care that she was wearing a hijab. They were just lovely to her. You know what she concluded from that?
Tell me.
Well, it was latent hatred, right? What better way for me to hide my vile Islamophobia than to overtly be very nice to the woman in the hijab, right? That's how I'm overcompensating for my hatred. So it is literally a a intellectually dishonest, unfalsifiable position. If I spew hatred towards the woman in question, I'm hateful. If I'm incredibly nice to the woman in question, I'm hateful. How can I avoid the appellation of hate? I can't. Everything leads to hate.
Right. And as I said before, the categories have already been set. So she's obviously taken the courses where she learned the hierarchy of oppression, and that I guess she counts as a woman of color.
Right.
And then that she's from Iran.
Right.
It's just a given that she will be, it's a given that no one will treat her well.
Exactly.
And that's what she sees.
Incidentally, one of the reasons to tie things back to my own work, one of the ways in which I became familiar with some of this feminist stuff is because inherently, as a evolutionary scientist, I'm aware that there is sexual dimorphism within the human species. I mean, that's how we biologically define our species, right? And therefore, there are endless number of ways, as a basal definition of our species, where you recognize that there are innate sex differences. And of course, I've done a lot of research in all sorts of ways to demonstrate many of these biological-based sex differences. And that's how I originally, if you like, academically speaking, I came to face a lot of this feminist nonsense, because I would oftentimes send my papers. Now, if I send my paper to a journal that is housed by natural scientists, they read the stuff and they go, oh yeah, sure, of course, menstrual cycle effects and testosterone and so on. If you send the paper to a journal, that is housed by, that has all the feminists and postmodernists and so on, then I would get back reviews that were simply astonishing, right? The mere fact that I was studying sex differences, the mere fact that I was recognizing that it is possible that sex differences might exist was inherently sexist, right? So it's breathtaking. Now, my feeling is, now you said that it's actually getting worse. I get the feeling, at least among the academic crowd that I navigate with, that some of that stuff is losing its power. For example, postmodernism doesn't seem to be as strong today as it was, say, 20 years ago. Is that your sense, or you would disagree with that?
Oh, I agree with that.
Okay, right.
But the gender scholars are...
So they're still ascending. The postmodernists are dying, but the gender scholars... But because the reason why...
And the gender scholars are very invested in this theory of sexual fluidity.
Right.
That it's fluid and that we all sort of exist it's all on a spectrum. And now that's not true.
Right.
If you actually check the real world,
right.
Most people have very strong sense of themselves as male or female, and then there's a tiny percentage of people who don't clearly identify as male. I mean, what is it? We're talking about less than 1% of the population.
I mean, I think there is. I think, at least the research that I'm aware of, that there is more sexual fluidity amongst women than there is among men. But you're right that most people tend to be less fluid than the narrative would suggest.
Right.
Yeah. Now, here's an interesting sort of personal anecdote. When I talk about all sort of my evolutionary-based stuff to a crowd of academics, and if there are feminists in the crowd, usually their response to whatever I'm saying will depend on whether that which I'm saying fits their narrative or not. So, for example, if I discuss evolutionary reasons why women have actually evolved to very much seek sexual variety, why they are hardly the Victorian chaste, prudes,
yeah, they like that.
Then, oh, Dr. Saad, brilliant work, bravo, you're a super guy. If, on the other hand, I might suggest something like, okay, true, yes, but by the way, there are reasons why men might have evolved greater penchant for sexual variety. Oh, Dr. Mengele, Nazi, right? So everything is viewed through the prism of whether it supports and confirms my ideology or not. So the epistemology is not the one that scientists follow. It's based on adherence to ideology, right?
Right. And that's why as I say, it's almost like a sort of strict religious
Yeah.
set of beliefs, and certain things they can accommodate and others they can't. It's not empirical. They begin as with this ideology.
Right.
And what I have found the same thing, by the way. And I think it was Roy Baumeister introduced,
Oh, yes.
quoting someone, this word, this WA phenomenon. Women are wonderful. So if you do a study and you find that women are better at something than men, we're better multitaskers, or women are, better, people love to say better negotiators or diplomats, and that's fine. Anything that so shows how wonderful women are. But if you dare to show that in any domain that men might have, superior ability, that is forbidden.
Sexist. It's funny because I've remarked the exact same point, but I didn't know that Baumeister had actually coined the term for it. So thank you. I just learned something new. I'll have to check it out.
It's called WA, the WA phenomenon. WAW. Women are wonderful.
I love it.
And you can make rooms of people just so happy.
Right.
And as he says, he likes women. He thinks they're wonderful, but
right.
But there are differences, and there are areas where men, on average, have better spatial reasoning skills and physically stronger. There are now young feminists that are so carried away with this idea that there's no such thing as masculine or feminine. They think that it's a social construct to say that women are stronger, that men are physically stronger.
Yeah, little boys are taught to play more rough and tumble, and that's what really develops their muscle fibers, and that allows them to then be stronger, right? That's what makes Bubba be a guard for the University of Nebraska football team. It's all due to social construction. It's breathtaking. Now, do you see a new generation of? Are there any new feminists? I mean, true feminists, not sort of the lunatic fringe, but feminists that you and I would agree are the types of feminists that we would like to see, spread their voices. Are there any that you can sort of promote here?
I'm very heartened by a group of liberals and feminists who've come forward at Harvard University, for example. Specifically Janet Haley, and I think it's Charles Ogletree. These are very liberal professors, Jenny Suk, but they've come out against this new regime about sexual harassment and Title IX, and lowering the standards of guilt for what turns out to be mostly young men. They have opposed it, and Professor Haley has just spoken out, and she's an old-time feminist. She's been and I think she's gay, and she has been fighting for women's rights, from since she was in college in the 70s. But she sees that this is the illiberalism, and that it's unconstitutional what's happening at Harvard around the so-called rape culture. You also have people like Wendy Kaminer and some professors at University of Pennsylvania, male and female, who are beginning to speak out, and that is a very good sign. We need more of them. Right. And I suspect they will be there.
Would you put Laura Kipnis as part of that crowd? Given what she
yes, Laura Kipnis is a great example.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
At Northwestern, where she's very much a feminist, and she found the idea of trigger warnings absurd and wrote a paper in the Chronicle of Higher Education, sort of making fun of it. 2 graduate students, what vindictive graduate students. Yeah. Where did this come from? People that are so angry and mean and want to hurt people. They said that they were triggered by her article, and they brought her up on Title IX.
And I think, you correct me if I'm wrong, that by her questioning the narrative of sort of the endemic campus rape culture, that was creating an unsafe environment for future generations. Hence, these women in the future would not have equal access to education. Hence, the Title IX being
Yes,
operative, right?
her article, they claimed, would violated Title IX, which
Incredible.
should have protected them from that kind of harassment. Well, it was complete nonsense. Now, they can bring up any charge they want. You would not expect the university
To
to
move forward,
investigate
yeah.
her. And it took several months. And she describes this Kafkaesque ordeal, having to explain what she wrote. Well, eventually they let her off. And then some people's apologists said, oh, well, the system worked. She was exonerated. No, the system did not work.
She's been punished by the virtue of the process.
By being investigated.
Yeah.
And this is happening. If you check out the organization FIRE, the Foundation
Oh,
for
yeah.
Rights Education, kids are being investigated in public universities where they apparently don't know that they have full set of their, constitutional rights.
Right.
And in fact, the Supreme Court has ruled over and over again that free speech is most important
Right.
in an intellectual setting. And that includes satire. It includes just almost anything.
Right.
that a kid would say. And yet kids are getting thrown out of school or punished for their text messages. And if they're thought to be with any sexual content now,
Right.
that could be considered. I just heard about a boy who's been punished severely. I think he lost his ROTC scholarship because of the school, not because of ROTC, because he was having a fight with his roommate and he wrote an aggressive message. And the roommate brought him up on a male roommate. And they were both heterosexual. The roommate said that he feminized him in the attack. I don't know what he said. I can imagine.
Yeah.
And he's been punished for that.
Unbelievable. But incidentally,
he doesn't know. Well, it's a private university. I guess they can
Right.
do that, but who knows?
You mentioned FIRE. I actually had Greg Lukianov on the show. Absolutely fantastic guy doing God's work if you believe in God. So yeah, he's a wonderful organization. People should support it. They're really standing at the forefront of trying to protect First Amendment rights of all people on university campuses. I guess I'll end today. I could keep you here for another 5 hours, but we have to end it, I suppose. I'll end it maybe by asking you if you've got any new projects, any new exciting initiatives that people might not be aware of that you'd like to briefly discuss and give us the first scoop on.
Well, as I told you, I'm working on intersectionality. I'm doing whether it's what its proponents claim, it's this liberating philosophy, or is it, as I said, a victimology that's spun out of control.
This is a book you're working on? Is this a book or
I'm
a paper?
working on it, yes.
Okay.
I'm trying to keep an open mind. I read these books and I think, okay, I'm going to agree with her. I'm reading Bell Hooks, and there are things I like about her in the book, and then suddenly there'll be, she'll talk about the capitalist, patriarchal, colonialist oppressor, and how we have to bring it down. What is she talking about?
Right.
Just this sloganeering and this paranoia. So that's one thing. But the most exciting thing I'm doing is a few weeks ago, I lecture on campuses a lot. And now Milo Yiannopoulos has started his tour. I'm not going to say the name of the tour. I don't approve of it.
Right.
But he has this tour, and I went with him together. We lectured at the University of Minnesota. It was a huge success. We got a standing ovation.
Nice.
The audience was full. Now he's, a charismatic figure, and people love Milo, and even people disagree with him. They come. So we got a huge audience. But then I have the opportunity to be. It's sort of bad cop, good cop, but it's more like concerned mother and wayward son. So I correct him and say, what he really means to say is, and try to rein him in.
Right. Right.
As much as I can.
So you guys are going together to several different venues?
Yes, and so I think we're going to Notre Dame.
Nice.
On April 6th, and where there's discussions of Cornell and a few other places.
My alma mater.
Cornell's
yes. My alma mater, yeah.
They're trying to make it happen.
Oh, very nice. Wonderful. Hey, try to make it up here to Montreal. Maybe you'll thaw some of the cold that we have up here with your lovely presence.
Oh, I would love to go. I love Montreal.
Yeah. Oh, good. Nice. Well, for about 8 months a year, it's gorgeous. For about 4 months, you need to cocoon and just be patient and let the winter wear out. Anyways, thank you so much for this chat. It was a real pleasure. Of course, I've followed your stuff for a long time, so it was a real honor to have you join me. Stay on the line. I'm going to stop the taping now, and we'll just wrap it up offline. Thank you so much, Christina.
Thank you.